The day I realized my wife was lying to me, I wasn't reading her body language. I was listening to her grammar. She didn't know I spoke her native tongue. She thought the call she took every Thursday evening, the one where her voice dropped to a whisper and her syntax shifted into something secret, was a locked room. It was a window, and what I heard through it changed everything. My name is Adrian. I speak 4 languages. My wife Alina only knows about 3 of them. She's a senior director at a global consulting firm, and every Thursday evening she took a phone call in what she assumed was a private, locked language, Russian. She thought I was in the garage. I was in the hallway, and I understood every single word. What I thought would be proof of infidelity unspooled into something far colder, a scheme to dismantle my career, siphon our assets, and frame me as the unstable one. All of it discussed in a tongue she believed I could never penetrate, and I let her keep believing that, because the most dangerous person in the room isn't the one who talks, it's the one who listens. I met Alina when I was 44. She was 31, the sharpest person in any room, and she knew it. She had come to the United States 6 years earlier on a work visa, climbing faster than anyone expected. I was a managing partner at Blackbridge Capital, a firm that handled billion-dollar mergers. I spoke English, French, and German, the languages of boardrooms. Alina spoke Russian and English, and she made me feel like I had been speaking one language my whole life and missing half the world. We married in a civil ceremony in October, 2 years after we met. Her parents couldn't come, visa issues, she said. I accepted it. I accepted a lot of things. I started learning Russian 9 months into our marriage. She had mentioned once that her grandmother only spoke Russian and she missed talking to her in that language. I wanted to give her that connection, so I began with an app, then a graduate student from Kiev who gave lessons online. By the 3rd year, I was conversational. By the 5th, I could follow rapid speech and read between the lines. I never told her. I was waiting for the right moment, our 10th anniversary. I had it all planned. I would stand up at the dinner, raise a glass, and speak to her in her own tongue. She would be shocked, then she would cry, and it would be beautiful. That was the plan. But around year 7, the phone calls began. At first, just a few minutes on Saturday mornings, her voice soft. She said it was her cousin. I believed it. The calls grew longer and her tone changed. She started closing her office door, stepping outside when she thought I was busy. The distance between us was subtle, a hand that did not linger, an answer that came a half-second too late. A man notices these things. I thought she was having an affair. I chased that thought for months, looking for receipts, hotel keys, anything. There was nothing, so I kept waiting, thinking it would pass. The first Thursday in March, she took a call at 7:30. I was in the garage working on the lawnmower. I came inside for a wrench and heard her through the closed door speaking Russian. She said, "Victor, the documents are ready. He will not suspect until it is too late." I froze. I understood every word. She went on, "The audit will hit next month. By the time he realizes, the accounts will be frozen. The board will have no choice but to remove him. And I will be the concerned wife, devastated, who just needs the house and the retirement funds to start over." Victor's voice was faint, but I caught the reply. "What if he fights?" Alina laughed. She said, "With what reputation? I have already planted the emails. Tomorrow, his login will be traced to that offshore account. It is done." I stood there in the hallway, a wrench in my hand, my heart pounding so loud I thought she would hear. The wife I loved had just described dismantling my entire existence, and she did it in a language she thought I could not understand. I did not confront her. I did not burst through the door. I had learned in 30 years of high-stakes negotiation that the moment you show your hand is the moment you lose. So I took a breath, turned around, and went back to the garage. I sat on the dusty concrete and thought about the woman I had married, the little clues I had ignored, the times she said we should combine finances more, the life insurance policy she had urged me to get, the appointment with a psychiatrist she had gently suggested because I seemed stressed, part of the paper trail I now understood to paint me as unstable. That night I lay in bed beside her pretending to sleep. I listened to her breathing, the rhythm of someone with no conscience. And I made a decision. I would not run. I would not confront her prematurely. I would learn every detail of the plot, record every conversation, document every planted file. I would become the ghost in my own marriage, invisible and fluent. The next morning I called my attorney. But before I could even start to build my case, I found something that made my blood run cold. It was not just Victor and Elena. They had someone inside my company high up, and they were moving faster than I imagined. On my desk, after my morning coffee, was a folder. Inside were copies of wire transfers I had never authorized, agreements I had never signed, and at the bottom, a memo addressed to the board recommending my immediate suspension. The plan was not starting in a month. It had already begun. I opened the folder with shaking hands. The wire transfer authorizations listed amounts I had never seen: $75,000 to an account in the Cayman Islands, $120,000 more to a shell company in Cyprus. The signature block on each document carried my name, but the signature itself was off. It was close, but a forger always leaves a tell. The loop on the D in Adrian was too wide. I had signed my name 1,000,000 times, I knew. The accompanying memo to the board was signed by Marcus Webb, our chief operating officer, the man I had mentored for 11 years. He recommended my immediate suspension pending a forensic audit, citing irregular financial activity and concern for the stability of the managing partner. Stability. The word Elena had planted with the psychiatrist, the word that would now be used to dismantle my reputation. I closed the folder and placed it in my briefcase. I did not call security. I did not storm into Marcus's office. The man who survives a knife in the back does not pull it out in the lobby. He waits until he is in the operating room. I had less than 72 hours to build my surgical suite. That evening, I told Elena I had a late client dinner. She kissed my cheek and said she hoped it went well. I watched her eyes, nothing, not a flicker. She was either a master dissembler or a sociopath, and I was no longer certain there was a difference. I drove to the office of an old friend, Michael Torres, a forensic accountant who had testified in 17 federal fraud cases. I laid the folder on his desk. He spent 20 minutes examining the documents in silence. Then he looked up and said, "Adrian, these forgeries are good, but whoever did this didn't know about the Cerberus Protocol." Cerberus Protocol was a failsafe I had installed in our financial system after a 2014 phishing attempt nearly cost us $1.2 million. It required 3 independent digital signatures for any wire over $50,000. One of those signatures had to be a rotating code generated by a physical token I kept on a chain around my neck. I pulled it out from under my shirt. It had never left my body in 8 years. The transfers in that folder could not have been processed. They were theatrical, designed to look convincing in a board packet, not to survive a real audit. That was my first advantage. My second was the language they thought I did not speak. The next morning, I installed a small recording device in the bookcase of my home office, positioned to capture the phone calls Elena took at her desk. I also logged into the home Wi-Fi router and mirrored all traffic to a secure cloud server. I was not a spy. I was a man who had spent 3 decades reading contracts and finding the clause that changed everything. A marriage is a contract. Hers had a loophole, and she was counting on me never seeing it. On Friday, 36 hours before the scheduled board meeting, I was in my study when Elena took a call at 4 o'clock. I turned on the recorder. She spoke Russian, rapid and fluid. "Victor, the package is with Marcus. He will present it at the meeting on Sunday morning. The board will vote. Adrian will be removed by noon. Then the interim management clause kicks in." She paused. "Power of attorney for healthcare if he is declared mentally unfit. I have the doctor's report. It states he has been showing signs of paranoia and cognitive decline. He will have no access to the accounts. I will control everything." My hands were steady. I had trained for this moment for 5 years without knowing it. She continued. Victor asked, "What if he resists? What if he gets a lawyer?" Elena laughed. "With what? The accounts will be frozen before he wakes up Sunday. I have already opened the new accounts in my name alone. By Monday, I file for separation. By Tuesday, he will be in a psychiatric evaluation that I have arranged. The report will be enough to hold him for 72 hours. After that, the world will see a woman who tried to help her sick husband and a man who betrayed his company and his vows." She hung up. I counted to 10, then stood and walked calmly to the kitchen. I made coffee. I drank it. I did not scream or break anything. I was past rage. I was in the clean, cold air of strategy, and I had a recording. I reviewed the tape 5 times that night. It was unambiguous. Conspiracy, fraud, attempted false imprisonment. I sent a copy to Michael Torres and to my lawyer, a woman named Delia Grant who specialized in corporate defense. Delia called me back in 20 minutes. Adrian, this is enough for a restraining order, a criminal complaint, and a very ugly divorce. But you said you want more than survival. You want a reversal that can't be undone. Do you have proof of Marcus's involvement? I told her I was working on it. I had one day. On Saturday, the day before the board meeting, I invited Marcus to lunch at the club. He arrived in a blue blazer, all polish and smiles. I ordered a bottle of wine. I talked about the old days, the first deal we closed together. He was relaxed. I leaned forward and said, Marcus, I have a problem. Someone is trying to push me out of my own firm. I think it's coming from outside, someone who has corrupted a few people inside. He blinked. His right hand moved to his lap. I continued, I need your help. I need you to go through the internal logs and find any unusual access to the wire system. I'm trusting you because I don't know who else I can trust. He looked me in the eye and said, Absolutely, Adrian, I'll get on it right away. He was lying with the same fluency he had learned from me. I smiled and thanked him. As we walked out, I palmed his phone from the valet stand where he had left it to pay the tip. I had seen the passcode once, his daughter's birthday, a number I had memorized from a birthday cake 4 years ago. I stepped into the restroom, unlocked the phone, and downloaded his last 2 weeks of messages. There it was, a chat with Nikoleva containing detailed instructions on how to alter the board packet, how to schedule the emergency meeting, how to stall any internal investigation. One message from Marcus read, She's worth it. He's a dinosaur. Time for new management. I forwarded the entire chain to my phone, deleted the evidence on his phone, and placed it back on the valet stand. He never noticed. I had my second recording. That evening I went home to Quiet House. Elena was in the bedroom, packing a small overnight bag. She said she was going to her sister's for the night, a sudden visit. I said, of course, drive safe. I knew she was going to meet Victor and finalize the boardroom ambush. I watched her car pull away. Then I went to my study and opened a drawer she had never seen, a locked compartment behind a false panel that I had built myself years ago. Inside was a notebook with every property I owned, every account, every document that defined my life apart from hers. I had never combined all the finances. Despite her pressure, I had kept a separate trust that she had no access to, seeded with assets from before our marriage. She thought she would control everything. She controlled only what I had allowed her to see. I packed the notebook, the recordings, and the forged documents into a single leather bag. I called Delia. I have everything, the co-conspirator, the messages, the taped admission. I am ready, she said. Then we walk into that boardroom tomorrow and we do not defend, we prosecute. I slept 2 hours that night. At 3 in the morning, my phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number in Russian. It read, he knows. Victor has been watching your office. He saw you take the folder, be careful. I stared at the screen. Someone inside their circle had just warned me, but who, and could I trust them? The clock ticked toward the meeting. I had no time to find out. I put the phone down and closed my eyes. The sun would rise in 4 hours, and when it did, a corporation would try to execute me, my wife would try to destroy me, and I would finally speak the language of the room, the one I was never supposed to understand. I arrived at the Blackbridge headquarters at 9 o'clock Sunday morning. The building was empty except for the executive floor, where the boardroom lights were already on. I wore my gray suit, the one I had worn to close the Morrison merger, the one Elena once said made me look like a diplomat. She had no idea how much diplomacy I would need today. The leather bag was in my hand. Inside it were the recordings, the forged documents, the chat logs, and a written statement that Delia Grant had helped me draft until 2 in the morning. I walked past the glass walls of Marcus Webb's office. He was not there. He was already in the boardroom, arranging his ambush. I paused at the door. Through the frosted glass, I could see 7 board members seated. Marcus stood at the head of the table, next to a projector screen displaying what I knew would be the forensic audit slides. The woman from the SEC compliance unit, Judith Kwan, sat with a notepad. The board chairman, Robert Halford, was at the center of the table. His expression was the careful blank of a man who had already been told a story and was waiting to hear how it ended. I opened the door, every face turned. Marcus stopped mid-sentence. I smiled. Good morning, everyone. Sorry I'm a bit early. I wanted to make sure I had time to address the first agenda item. Robert Halford cleared his throat. Adrian, I think you know why we're here. We've seen some extremely troubling documentation. We've called this emergency session to review potential financial misconduct. We thought it best to proceed without you present until we had clarity. I understand completely, I said, settling into the chair at the far end of the table. But before you proceed, I'd like to claim my right to respond. Not in a closed session, but right here, right now. You have documents that suggest I authorized fraudulent wire transfers. You have a memo from Marcus recommending my suspension pending mental evaluation. I have seen those documents. And I can prove, in the next 15 minutes, that I am the victim of a coordinated conspiracy involving wire fraud, forgery, and attempted corporate takeover by foreign actors. The room went still. I opened my bag and placed a small speaker on the table. I set my phone beside it. I am going to play a recording that I made in my own home with my wife the day before yesterday. It is in Russian. I will translate for you. For those who wish to verify my translation, I've already submitted a certified transcript to a translator hired by my attorney. I will provide copies after this meeting. I hit play. Elena's voice filled the room, rapid, cold, fluid Russian. I translated in real time, line by line, as she described the forged transfers, the planned board meeting, the power of attorney, the psychiatric hold. I saw Marcus's face lose color, the way a photograph fades in reverse, leaving only white. I saw Robert Halford's jaw tighten. I saw Judith Kwan start writing furiously. When the recording ended, I stopped the speaker. That was my wife, Elena Nikolaeva, born in Yekaterinburg, former financial attaché to the Russian trade delegation. She is not here today. She is, I believe, finalizing the new accounts into which she intended to transfer the funds she planned to steal from me and from this firm. But before we talk about her, let's talk about the person in this room. I placed the chat logs on the table. These are messages between Elena and Marcus Webb, extracted from Marcus's device. They include detailed instructions on how to alter the board packet, how to schedule this meeting without my knowledge, and how to stall any internal investigation. I will read a sample. Marcus wrote, and I quote, "She's worth it. He's a dinosaur. Time for new management." Marcus stood up. "This is insane. That's fabricated. You hacked my phone." I looked at him. "You left it on the valet stand. I've known your passcode for 4 years, but the content of the messages isn't fabricated. Your digital footprint is already with the FBI. They are waiting in the lobby." I nodded toward the door. 2 agents from the Financial Crimes Unit, whom I had contacted via Delia Grant at 6 that morning, stepped inside. Marcus froze. He looked around the boardroom as if searching for a door that wasn't there. Robert Halford rose slowly. "Marcus, you are suspended pending investigation. Please leave with these gentlemen." Marcus did not speak. He walked out, an agent flanking each side. The boardroom was silent again, the silence of a bomb that had detonated and left everyone still standing. I leaned forward. This is not just a personal betrayal. This is a corporate takeover attempt by Viktor Riznik. I placed a photo on the table. Viktor Riznik, a former Moscow banker turned private investor, a man I had outbid on a distressed private equity deal 12 years ago. The deal cost him $100 million and his reputation with the central bank. He disappeared from legitimate finance, but I had tracked him through offshore filings. He had spent the last decade building a network of shell companies designed to acquire undervalued assets in hostile territories. Blackbridge was on his list. He needed a lever. Elena was that lever. I explained the connection. Elena met Viktor through a trade delegation 3 years before she met me. Their relationship was not romantic. It was professional. She was a facilitator, a cultured, multilingual operative who embedded herself with targets and executed long-term coercions. I was the target, and she had been patient. This is where the story gets worse. This is where I tell you something I did not know until that night. I found a second set of messages, buried in an encrypted folder on my home server. They were not on Elena's phone. They were on my own device, planted there by a remote access tool that Elena had installed months ago, using a router update as cover. The messages were between her and someone I never expected, my personal physician, Dr. Robert Henshaw. He had been prescribing mild anxiety medication for me for 2 years, medication that I now learned had been intentionally dosed to create symptoms of cognitive decline, memory gaps, mild confusion, the kind of symptoms that make a man doubt himself, the kind of symptoms that show up on tests and in psychiatric evaluations. He was part of the network. Victor had paid his gambling debts 18 months ago. The doctor's note that was to be presented to the board, the one recommending my mental evaluation, was not forged. It was signed by my own doctor, based on a condition he himself had induced. I learned this on Saturday night, sitting in my study, checking the server logs. The moment I realized that my body, my mind, had been turned against me, I felt something colder than fear. I felt rage that had no shape. I called Delia. She was silent for 30 seconds. Then she said, "Adrian, we have to go to the board. But this is no longer just about your job or your money. This is attempted murder by medical means. This is organized crime." I made a choice. I would not hide the medical records. I would present them. Because the most powerful weapon a conspirator has is the victim's shame, and I decided I had none left. I laid the medical evidence before the board. I showed them the prescription history, the dosages, the email from Henshaw to Alina confirming the schedule of administration. I showed them the side effects, cognitive blunting, short-term memory loss, emotional instability. I told them how I had noticed my own thoughts slipping, how I had questioned my sanity, how I had kept it hidden because that is what men do. We do not admit when our minds are eroding. She knew that. Victor knew that. They had weaponized silence itself. The board was not just in shock. They were in grief. These were people I had worked with for decades. Robert Halford, a man I once helped pull out of a personal bankruptcy, looked at me and said, "Adrian, what do you need?" I said, "I need the firm to open a formal investigation. I need the FBI to take over from here. I need my attorney to file for an emergency restraining order and asset freeze against Alina. And I need you to trust me for the next 4 hours while I go home, because Alina is still there. She thinks I am the man who just walked into his own execution. She does not know the execution has been cancelled. I need to face her, alone." I stood up. I packed the documents back into my bag. I told them the FBI was securing Viktor Riznik at that very moment, thanks to an intercepted flight booking. The warning text I received in the night, the one that told me Victor knew I had taken the folder, came from a young man named Alexei, an IT specialist in Victor's network who had been coerced into helping. He had sent that warning because he had a conscience that still worked. He was now a cooperating witness. I walked out of Blackbridge headquarters at 10:15 in the morning. The sky was a sharp September blue. I drove home, not speeding, not rushing. The house was a 20-minute drive. I used that time to calm my hands and to remember every word of Russian I had ever learned. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw Alina's car parked by the side door. The house looked peaceful. I could see her silhouette in the kitchen window. She was on the phone again. I shut off the engine, checked the small recorder in my pocket, and walked to the door. I opened it and found her sitting at the kitchen island, a cup of coffee in her hand, her phone to her ear. She looked up and smiled, covering the receiver briefly. "Adrian, I thought you were at a breakfast meeting. How did it go?" I walked past her to the sink. I poured myself a glass of water. Then I turned around, leaned against the counter, and answered her in Russian. "It went exactly as you planned. Except for one thing, I understood every word you said to Victor, every word you've said for years. So now you and I are going to have the conversation you never thought we could have. Sit down, you're not going anywhere." Alina's coffee cup stopped halfway to her lips. The phone slipped from her fingers and clattered onto the marble countertop. She stared at me as if I had just grown a second head. I repeated the phrase in Russian, the exact words I had heard her speak to Victor. "The audit will hit next month. By the time he realizes, the accounts will be frozen." Her face, always so carefully composed, collapsed into something I had never seen. Fear, yes, but also disbelief. The disbelief of a chess player who has just seen a pawn take the queen. I walked closer, pulled out the chair across from her, and sat down. I spoke Russian again, slowly, deliberately. "You are wondering how long I have understood. The answer is 5 years. I learned for you, Alina. I wanted to surprise you on our 10th anniversary. Instead, I surprised myself. I learned that the woman I loved was planning to dismantle my mind, my company, and my life. and she discussed every detail in the language she thought was a locked door. She tried to stand. I put my hand flat on the table. Sit down. The FBI is on its way. Viktor Riznik is already in custody. Marcus Webb was arrested at the boardroom table an hour ago. Your doctor friend Henshaw is being served a warrant as we speak. The documents you planted, the accounts you opened, the emails you forged, they have all been copied and time-stamped and handed to a federal prosecutor. There is no door left for you to run through. Elena's composure shattered. She began to cry, tears that I had once believed. She spoke through them, switching to English, the language she thought would soften me. Adrian, you don't understand. Viktor forced me. He threatened my family. I never wanted to hurt you. I love you. I looked at her, and for the first time in years, I saw her clearly. Not as my wife, but as a woman who had made a series of calculations and found herself on the losing side. You love no one, I said. You used the word love as a password to access my accounts, my trust, my body. The medication Henshaw prescribed, the drugs that made me forget my own phone number, that made me doubt every thought in my head, you signed off on that. You watched me stumble and you said, he's just getting old. That is not love, that is chemical warfare. She stopped crying abruptly, the way a faucet is turned off. Her eyes dried, and beneath them I saw the coldness that had always been there, the calculation that I had mistaken for intelligence. You think you've won, she said, but I still have friends, I still have resources. This is not over. I stood up and walked to the front door. Through the window, I saw 2 unmarked black sedans pulling into the driveway. 4 agents stepped out, their movements efficient and practiced. I opened the door. It is over, Elena, you just don't know it yet. They came in and read her rights. She was handcuffed and led out of the house in full view of the neighbors, her yoga pants and cashmere sweater suddenly looking absurdly out of place. The lead agent, a woman named Detective Marisol Vega, asked me to come to the field office for a formal statement. I followed them in my own car, watching the sedan that carried my wife merge onto the freeway and disappear. At the FBI office, I gave my statement in a small, windowless room that smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant. I handed over every recording, every document, every timestamped piece of digital evidence. I also gave them a blood sample, because the medical tampering was now a separate criminal investigation. The toxicology report later confirmed exactly what I suspected. The medication in my system was not the mild anti-anxiety drug I had been prescribed. It was a combination of benzodiazepines and a synthetic compound designed to mimic early-onset dementia. My own body had been a crime scene for 2 years. 3 days later, I sat in the office of a neurologist who told me the word I had dreaded but also needed to hear, reversible. With cessation of the drug and a carefully managed recovery plan, my cognitive function could return to baseline within 6 to 12 months. I would have to retrain my memory, do daily exercises, avoid stress. But I would get my mind back. I had already won the first battle. Now I had to win the one inside my own skull. The legal machine ground forward with surprising speed. Viktor Riznik was charged with conspiracy, wire fraud, and attempted corporate espionage. His extradition to the United States took 6 weeks, during which the FBI dismantled his network of shell companies and seized $41 million in assets. Marcus Webb pleaded guilty to 2 felony counts in exchange for testimony against Elena. Dr. Robert Henshaw surrendered his medical license and accepted a plea deal that included 5 years in federal prison. I watched every hearing from the front row, not out of vengeance, but out of a need to see it through, to close every door I had opened. Elena's trial was the hardest. She sat in the courtroom in a modest gray suit, her hair pulled back, looking for all the world like a grieving spouse. Her defense argued that she had been coerced by Viktor, that she was a victim of a manipulative older man who had exploited her immigrant fears. I took the stand and testified for 4 hours. I spoke in English, but at one point, when the prosecutor asked me to read a transcript of one of her phone calls, I read it in the original Russian, then translated it. I saw the jury's faces change. I saw the last illusion of her victimhood dissolve. She was found guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced her to 18 years. As she was led away, she looked at me one final time. I thought she might mouth something, an apology, a curse, a plea. She said nothing. I felt no satisfaction, only the heavy stillness of a storm that had finally passed. In the months that followed, I returned to Blackbridge. The board had already reinstated me, and the firm had weathered the scandal with surprising resilience. Clients who had been ready to flee were persuaded to stay when they learned the full story. Some of them even told me, in private, that my experience had made them re-examine their own vulnerabilities. I started speaking at industry conferences, not just about finance, but about trust, about the hidden languages of deception, about the discipline of listening. My story became a case study. I did not shy away from it. I leaned in because silence had nearly killed me. And then there was the letter. It arrived 6 months after the trial, handwritten in careful English from a young man named Alexei Kozlov. He was the IT specialist who had sent me the warning text that night. He was also, as I learned from the letter, Elena's half-brother. They shared a mother, a woman who had died of cancer when Alexei was 15 and Elena was 22. After that, Elena had raised him in every sense but the legal one, and when Victor came into her life, Alexei had been pulled into the orbit as well. He had not known the full extent of the plan, only that he was being asked to monitor my digital footprint. When he realized what they intended to do, he had tried to stop it. The warning text was the only way he could think of to tip the balance without endangering his own life. I called my attorney. I arranged a meeting with Alexei, who had cooperated fully with the FBI and was now living under witness protection. We met in a diner outside Chicago, a neutral ground. He was 24 years old, thin, with dark circles under his eyes and a tremor in his hands. We sat across from each other, two men who had been damaged by the same woman in entirely different ways. He apologized. I told him I did not blame him. I told him that his warning had likely saved my life, because without it, I might not have moved as fast as I did. He began to cry, and I sat with him until he stopped. That was the moment I understood that revenge was never the goal. The goal was to break the chain, to ensure that the rot Elena had spread did not consume one more soul. I helped Alexei get a job at a cybersecurity firm. He is doing well now. We speak occasionally, and when we do, we speak Russian. It is no longer a secret language. It has become for me a language of reclaimed power, a tongue I wield openly. I kept none of the money from the seizure. It all went back to the firm and to the investors Victor had defrauded. I kept the house, but I sold it. Too many ghosts. I live in a smaller place now, closer to the city, with a view of the lake and a bookshelf full of Russian literature that I read in the original. What I have learned is this: the most dangerous person in any room is not the one who speaks the loudest. It is the one who listens without being noticed. I became that person out of necessity, but I remain that person out of wisdom. I still speak 4 languages, and I am learning a 5th, Mandarin, because the world keeps turning and I refuse to be left behind. But the language that saved my life was the one I was never supposed to know. And if there is a final lesson, it is that secrecy is a weapon that cuts both ways. Elena thought she had a private channel, a hidden frequency, where she could plot my destruction with impunity. She never considered that the receiver might be on. That is the mistake every deceiver makes. They underestimate the person they are deceiving. They forget that silence is not ignorance, and that a man who seems lost may, in fact, be mapping the entire terrain. I am 62 years old now. My mind is sharp again. The fog has lifted completely, and with it, the shame I carried for so long. I am not the victim of a conspiracy. I am the man who dismantled it from the inside, armed with nothing but a dictionary, a voice recorder, and the patience to wait for the right moment to reveal what I knew. That is a power no one can take from me, and one I will never lay down again. I told you this story not because it is exceptional, but because it is almost ordinary. Every day, people speak in front of others in languages they assume are private. Every day, secrets move through the air in words that someone nearby might understand. The difference between safety and catastrophe is not always a locked door. Sometimes it is a forgotten vocabulary. What happened to me was a conspiracy, yes. It involved forged documents and federal agents and a trial that sent 3 people to prison. But at its core, it was built on a single miscalculation. Elena believed that her language was a wall. It was a window, and I was not the only one who could see through it. The FBI analyst who reviewed my recordings told me that in the past decade, More than half of the corporate espionage cases they had prosecuted involved a hidden language or a coded dialect that the perpetrators assumed was impenetrable. They were wrong every time. We live in a world of polyglots, of blended families, of translation apps that fit in a pocket. The old idea that you can speak freely in your native tongue around an English-only partner is no longer a safe bet. It never was. But beyond the specific risk, there is a deeper truth about listening. Most people listen only for what they expect to hear. They filter out the unfamiliar, the accented, the foreign. They stop paying attention when they assume they cannot understand. That is the gap that every deceiver exploits. And that is the gap I closed in myself years before I needed it. I'm not asking you to become paranoid. I am asking you to become present. The world is speaking all around you in languages you might not yet know, and every one of those languages carries stories, warnings, confessions, and sometimes conspiracies. The question is not whether you have secrets in your life. The question is whether you are willing to learn the language that will reveal them. As for me, I keep my dictionary on my nightstand now, right next to the folder that held the evidence of my own near destruction. It reminds me every morning that the weapon that nearly killed me was also the one that saved me. Knowledge is neutral. It is how you use it that changes everything. If this story stayed with you, if you have ever wondered what someone was saying behind your back, or if you simply believe that the truth is worth learning a few new words for, then hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Because the world is full of people who think no one is listening, and I want to tell you about all of them.